Welcome to WFPC Podcasting, your local source for the heart and history of Pike County, Indiana. And now, here's your host, Randy Harris.
Welcome to WFPC Podcasting. This is a weekly look at news, information, and the people in and around Pike County. Today, we are more aware of an ever-changing society and an ever-changing earth. Land use is different. And with the growing population, farmers are challenged with making land as productive as possible. Regenerative farming focuses on restoring and improving soil health to regenerate the soil. We have a couple of different area farmers with families generations deep into farming who are always trying to improve that ecosystem function. Today we welcome Tom Rudolph and Tony Hinkle. Gentlemen, welcome. So we got Tom Rudolph right here. We got Tony Hinkle right here. I've known your family since I moved here. And you, I've known through a different life as well. But we're blending you guys together to talk about regenerative farming. Give me a better understanding. What is the goal here? What is regenerative farming?
Well, regenerative farming is, if you just look at the name, it's regenerating the soil. Many of our farming practices, since the beginning of time, agriculture, some of the practices that we use basically degrade the soil slowly over time. The most obvious thing is, erosion. When you have a rainstorm and you lose a couple of inches of dirt in a spot. But it goes further than that. It's not just losing some soil that's going downstream. It's losing nutrients, losing life in the actual soil, no matter where it is in the field. And so regenerative farming basically is working with nature to farm instead of against nature. Where a lot of farming right now is, I'm going to kill everything but my crop. And regenerative farming starts with a different premise. This is that I'm going to work with nature to grow a crop. So, Tom, do you have any?
No, it's anything else? Let's start then. Basically, what my grandpa used to say, and you knew Austin, he said, a farmer's goal should be to build as many tons of organic matter possible an acre. And that's life, had something growing out there all year, keep a living root. And that's something that I got into realization with there in the last few years. Is I always thought organic matter was plant material, root, stems, leaves. 80% of soil organic matter is biology. It's bacteria and fungi and just life in the soil that we don't think much about.
And that's what regenerates the soil to keep it healthy, to keep.
Yeah, one of the principles just minimize disturbance. And disturbance could be or fertilize or chemical, it could be a plow, it could be anything,
Could be coal mines.
Yeah.
Solar fields.
Yeah. It's basically we want diversity. You want as much diversity out there as you can.
To make that ground as healthy as you can to get the most out of it that you can for sustainability, for our food source.
Yeah.
Yeah, and regenerative farming takes advantage of the natural cycles in nature and to basically, as Tom stated, to build organic matter over time. Whereas the way we farm, the most of the land is farmed right now just slowly degrades the organic matter, slowly degrades the health and the viability of the soil. And there, some people that, some scientists that say eventually we're basically going to farm, if we keep farming the same way, we're going to farm our ground to where it's desert. It's not going to be able to grow anything anymore. It's just going to be, dead soil. And, part of that is it, just like humans have to have bacteria in our gut in order to digest food, in order to live. We would die without bacteria. Plants are the same way. They have a very symbiotic relationship with bacteria in the soil. Plants exude sugars through their roots to feed the bacteria, and the bacteria in turn go out and break down complex molecules in the soil to make more simple molecules that the plants need and can ingest in order to survive, in order to build their plant mass.
So how do you two are my terms? You're big farmers. You're not these conglomerates, but you farm a lot of acres. How do you work this into what is your do?
Compared to the big guys, we're not much, but it's a lot of late nights to get the cover crop in the ground. That it kind of takes a little more time, but if we weren't doing that, we'd be spending time in a tractor pulling a tillage tool of some sort, probably. So,
Yeah.
but it's less fuel. A lot of these guys do. I'm not a numbers guy, so I don't have all the stats, but there's guys that have kept their fuel bill by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, there are thousands at Baker Farm, but they can really reduce a lot of inputs.
Well, explain that to us, because
Well, less tillage for one. So if you're not doing tillage, you save your fuel there, obviously. And then if you get into the system a little better, you start having more weed control. You're essentially like you're mulching your garden. So your cover crop's creating a mulch barrier there, so you're not getting as much weed pressure. So that can cut out a lot of chemistry or an extra pass or two of guttering fuel.
We briefly mentioned your grandpa, Austin. I remember having a conversation with him. It was an interview. It was for radio 37 years ago. And he was recognized by people throughout the state as being on the forefront of no-till. Yeah, he went, and correct me if I'm wrong, fact check me, but he went to Purdue in 1920 something.
It was early. He rode a train there, and might have been the first ag class they had, or so. Yeah.
So your family, and then that's followed through to your mom and dad, to Chris and Amy. Your family's always been on the forefront of this.
Yeah, it's done all I've ever known as, I don't know, conservation farming, or however you want to look at it.
And the Hinkles, now they're Pike County. You're not exactly Pike County. You're just across the White River, but you could we were talking the other day, you could throw a baseball into Pike County.
Yeah.
And he's on the river as well, so you're not far from each other, but there's a river that separates you.
Yeah.
But it's all the same by you.
Yeah. My brother Troy works for the Knox County Soil and Water Conservation District. So it's kind of his job to keep on top of, what's going on in agriculture and what the best way to take care of your land is. So he's the one in our family that, really deserves the credit for where we're going with this. I'm better looking. That's why I'm here today instead of him. So anyway, I'm funnier too. So anyway, apparently not that funny. You got laughing. So Troy's the one that, a couple of years ago said, okay, we need to really start making a commitment to do the things we know are the right thing to do. And like Tom said, you spend a lot of hours planting the cover crop, and that's, try to get that planter in the field right after the combine goes through. Well, harvest is a pretty busy time to begin with. There's a lot of logistics involved. And then when you throw in, keeping another tractor running and keeping the planter full of seed, that's another person you have to add into your crew to get that done, assuming if you want to keep harvesting at the same rate. So and that's why a lot of farmers don't do it. It's a very time consuming during a busy time of the year.
It's not making you money today.
Well, what you eventually come to realize is it does make you money today. Maybe not this fall, but next spring and the following years afterward. Because you're building the fertility of that soil, you're not going to have to buy as much fertilizer next year and the year after and the year after. We've cut our fertilizer bill tremendously. And as Tom mentioned, your fuel bill goes down. Pulling a planter through the field, your tractor's at really low RPM. It doesn't take that near as much fuel as pulling a tillage implement. Pulling a tillage implement through the field, that takes a lot of fuel. Pulling a planter or a crimper to smash down the cover crop, those things don't take much fuel. And looking forward, we're this is kind of where the latest technologies seem to be going in our favor. One of the things that we're looking at doing is seeding more cover crops before we harvest with a drone. They've got drones now, agricultural drones that will carry over 200 pounds of seed.
Wow.
And spread it around. And we did about 40 acres this year with a drone. And, about a week before we harvested soybeans, and it turned out really well. So we're really considering that now. So that would shift that labor to get your cover crop planted from during harvest time to pre-harvest time. So you can do it in September, or maybe even late August, and get your cover crop seed spread out. And then as soon as it rains, even though, a lot of this cover crop seed will sprout and grow, even though it's not planted in the ground. If it's just sitting on top of the ground, it'll take off. So it just needs to get a rain or two, and then you'll have a cover crop already growing. And, Tom has mentioned having a living root in the ground, and, going back to that thought of, the plants are feeding the bacteria and the fungi and the other things in the soil. So if one of the principles for regenerative farming is you keep a living root in the soil as much as possible. So if we can, use a drone to spread our cover crop, to sow our cover crop in August and September, it's helped us with a labor issue, and it's also benefits the soil because it has a living root growing in it when, as the corn or soybeans or whatever dies and those roots become inactive. So we're looking seriously into doing some stuff like that. That'll be a big benefit if it turns out the way we think it will. And there are a lot of other farmers doing the same thing as well.
Yeah, technology has really allowed us to get by with a lot of to get to another place. Even the chemistry place, we would have had a hard time getting to where we're at with no-till without the chemistry that's been involved.
So, it seems like you got less and less farmland. You got more companies buying up bigger areas. You got Churner, you got Bill Gates. You've had things like that going on. You've got these solar fields in this area, and that's consuming a lot of land. How do we go from here? How do we grow up to keep up with this growing population? Is this all aid to that?
In some ways, yeah. I mean,
The trouble is, a lot of what we grow, corn and beans, are not going for human consumption. And we waste a lot of food. So I don't quite buy it. We have to feed the world and quite that angle.
Yeah, most of the corn goes to feed cattle and to make ethanol. So, if you do a search on the internet for regenerative farming, you're going to come across a lot of stuff about ranching and for how to, raise cattle hogs or goats or, chickens and all that sort of stuff in a regenerative way. Probably not going to get into that discussion about the details of all that right now, but, cattle that are not fed grain are healthier cow. A cow's gut and those four stomachs they have are not designed to process grain. They're designed to process grass and plants, non-grain stuff. So cattle that are on, just on pasture and, not necessarily just grass, but they're finding that cattle do well and do better if they have a diversity in their diet, because all these different plants have different nutrients and different enzymes and different things in them that can contribute to a healthy animal. And so that there's different arms of regenerative farming. One of them is row crops. Some of the things that Tom and I are doing are completely different than what the people that have orchards or vineyards are doing. They got different problems. They got different soils. They got different things, and then if you're just a rancher, I shouldn't say just a rancher. If you're a rancher, your approach to regenerative farming is going to be very different from what we're doing. Ideally, if we could, we would have every acre of farmland, no matter what you're doing with it, grazed, because once an animal gets on that land and leaves their natural fertilizer on that land, that's an all natural, perfect thing. That's like the way God designed it, right? So, but when it comes down to farming, thousands of acres or even hundreds of acres, trying to get all that grazed every year is, a massive, if not impossible task. And, there's a lot of equipment and planning and that sort of thing that have to go into doing something like that. But anyway, using rotational grazing for cattle to move them around the pasture very methodically to basically stimulates that plant and it fertilizes the soil to continuously build up organic matter. And that's out in the plains where they have several feet thick of topsoil. That's how that was built. That was bison going along eating grass, and they would eventually come around to that same spot months later.
Well, when you first mentioned this topic to me, my mind went to a 10, 12, 15 acre homesteader with a mini farm or something like that. But this is so much, and I hope they understand from listening to you. I'm not knowledgeable on this subject, so you're just taking your leads to explain to us what it's about, where it leads us.
Yeah, and this is taking it to scale. So you're like taking ideas that people have used in the small market garden or homesteading things. They've probably been adapted more things in and done a lot of the research on their own little properties to figure out a lot of the things that are best for us to use now and the big operation. So it's a matter of figuring out how to do that. So, one of the things that, somebody gardens a lot, they're going to use a lot of compost. Every year they're probably going to spread compost on their garden to increase the fertility. So that's one of the things that we're doing as well, is that you can basically make an extract of compost, and then that has all the bacteria and fungi and amoeba and nematodes and protozoa, has all that stuff that's alive in a compost, and that's what makes the compost fertile, is all these organisms. It's not the minerals in the compost, it's all these organisms. And so you can pull those organisms and spray it on a field or dribble it in for it when you plant. And those, you can, if you do that, you can immediately cut the amount of nitrogen you put on your corn, for example, because those organisms will free up nitrogen that's already in the soil and deliver it to the plants. Can't eliminate all of it, but you can eliminate, a good amount. So compost extract is one of the things that a lot of people are doing, and that you're spraying on that field things to promote the biology and that life in the soil. We're putting sugar, molasses. It's just food for that bacteria to eat. We don't spray fungicide unless it's absolutely necessary, and for our farm, it's never really absolutely necessary. Most farms that use fungicide once or twice a year, there's almost no fungus in the soil, and it plays an important part in building healthy soil. There's a fungus creates like this slime around it when it's in the soil to kind of protect it and keep it from losing moisture and that sort of thing, and that's called glomalin or glomalin. I don't know how they pronounce it, but
Both ways.
this wasn't discovered until like 1989, and so when the fungus dies, it leaves that that glomalin basically harms. It kind of becomes like a glue, so it's gluing the soil particles together, and therefore it's much less prone to being eroded by something. It's not going to it's glued together, and then and then there's some space where the fungus died and shrank because it lost its moisture. Now there's space in there for water to come in. So you're basically building your good soil is going to act like a sponge. It's going to accept a lot of water, and there again, it's going to reduce the amount of runoff, which reduces the amount of erosion, keeps our rivers and streams a lot cleaner and that sort of thing. So there's so many angles to go down this, and I know I'm talking a lot more than Tom, but Tom does it about 5 times more than I do. But
it's so vast, and I think part of what he's saying there, or if they use compost and the whatnot in a corn and bean rotation with our cover crops, is still not getting to having 1,600 species on the prairie and buffalo running on it. So it's going to be a big struggle for us to have healthy soil in a corn and bean rotation. But it's hard to get that diversity in there. And like when my grandpa bought the farm, there's a newspaper article that said he bought a house and they threw in 160 acres. It was rough. We had Dolan thought he would grow corn on that ground. Well, what he had different is what I've observed looking back is he had a 7-year rotation. Grow corn 1 year to make silage for the cows. So he had clover and the grass and cow around the knot and those other years. Where he did plow and use tillage, use green manure back then. They'd plow under a big living cover crop, and then that would be fertilized for the next crop that he'd plant immediately. So we got into corn beans in the 70s, I guess. And then probably found out some down in the 90s, late 90s, we started suffering more from erosion and chemical resistant weeds and stuff like that were becoming more of an issue.
yeah, so one of the big problems is soybeans have very little root structure, compared to corn or a clump of grass or something. So soybeans aren't doing very much, probably doing nothing, probably doing negative to build organic matter in soil. So, one of the things we're looking at is, figuring out how to interseed a grass or, some different plants along with the soybeans that will complement, won't steal, much of any yield. And those plants then can, coexist with the soybeans nicely and help offset some of that, takeaway that the soybeans are exacting on the soil. So there are things like that a lot of farmers are experimenting with, getting cover crops planted in June and in between the rows of their existing crop. And it'll be shaded out and it won't grow much. But when you harvest, it's already there and it'll take off as soon as it starts getting the sunshine. So there are a lot of interesting and exciting things that are happening. Tom mentioned earlier diversity. If you're just growing one thing, each plant has like a different set of circumstances that it likes. It has different bacteria that it works with and likes. And so if you're just growing one thing, you're shutting everything, you're shutting off a lot of the other life that would have to be there if you had a diverse group of plants in your field. So when one of the things with cover crops, if you just plant one species, if you just go out and plant cereal rye, well, that's better than nothing, but your soil isn't going to be as healthy as it could be if you planted, 4 or 5 different things, a grass and a brassica and a legume. And so, that's one of the things that you could tell if you drive by somebody's farm this time of year and they got, little green plants an inch or two high, and it's not just all the same plant. That farmer's interested in his soil health and he's doing something about it. If it's bare or if it just has, one type of grass in it, that they're not doing all that they could probably.
We'll be right back. But first, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors.
WFPC Podcasting is sponsored in part by Hathaway Excavating and Rock Yard, located right here in Pike County on State Road 64, just west of the Arthur Junction near the new Pike County EMS building. Besides excavating and dirt work, Hathaway Excavating adds a rock yard to their bundle of services, along with all kinds of dirt work, septic cleaning, septic installs, and always local friendly service. Hathaway Excavating and Rock Yard, 812-582-2646. Recently, the real estate market has been unpredictable. But at Harris Real Estate, we still have clients looking for homes and properties. Let us help you sell your home and or property and or find your next one. We're local. We know the business. We know the community. Harris Real Estate has listed and sold hundreds of properties right here. Harris Real Estate, 812-380-1065. And when you wash your car or vehicle on a regular basis, there are many advantages. You're easier to see, you preserve the life of your vehicle, help maintain its value, protect its paint, prevent corrosion, and it just looks better. It only takes 6 quarters or your credit card to get it started. Stop by Petersburg Car Wash today. Petersburg Car Wash, home of the springtime yellow Mustang. 401 South 9th Street, Petersburg. Thanks to you, our audience, WFPC Podcasting is growing. Since the first episode was launched May 28th, 80,000 views, including full episodes and social media views, have come in, and it's growing. People are coming back and watching the original programs for the first time. We appreciate you. If you have a business or product that you would like to advertise, and if we're a good fit for each other, contact us, 812-354-2006. Thanks again for watching. You two really don't your farming operation is not combined. You just kind of use each other as a resource, bounce ideas off. You farm up to the White River in Knox County, you farm up to the White River in Pike County, and there you kind of meet and you both have this similar interest and you just share with each other to make each other better, correct?
Yep.
Right on, yep. I met him at a field day a couple of years ago. We had on a farm. I knew his brother from the soil and water board, and found out he was making compost extract. So now I've been using that last 2 years, I think, and like to replace starter nitrogen they had in my corn. So yeah, there's a few of us in the area thinking like we are, trying to get on board with all those, but it's not catching on too quick.
But it's a noble goal.
It's a complete change of your system of farming and change of mindset.
Can you use the term holistic?
Yeah, you want to get there. You want to get there. You can't just, immediately, cut out herbicides, and glyphosate and things like that. You can't just jump off that ship immediately. But, the goal is to slowly, use less and less and less of the stuff that's not natural. And, whether it's fertilizer or herbicides or fungicide or, around here, we don't have a whole lot of pesticide use except in, like melons and pumpkins and things like that. They rely on a lot of pesticides. But, if you're killing all the insects, and if you can't just like target the one pest insect that you have. If you're going to kill that insect that is damaging your crop, you're going to kill almost every insect in the field. And so what that does is that means that whatever insect likes that crop, as soon as they can get back in there and survive, they explode because there are no predator insects in that field to keep them in check. And I think that's one of the things that's coming up here. We're going to get to see this new movie made on Tom's farm, I think Saturday,
About production.
about fireflies. Fireflies are predators. They're the
Fireflies still are for age. They spend 3 years in the soil, so if they spend 3 years in the soil eating bad bugs for us. And you're correct, we don't use as much pesticide, insecticide as a melon farmer, saying that almost every farmer has been applying neonicotinoids on their seedlings before planting, and that's not really necessarily needed. And just like he said, it kills all the bugs, and that's a water soluble chemical, so it's going into everything.
Dylan, can you tell us when that movie is coming out? When will it be released?
This weekend will be the premiere.
And we are pre-taping this, so it's probably out at this. And how do we find it?
Pike County Soil and Water's Facebook page will probably be a good link to it, and I'm sure it'll be on Query Later Dead Explore Selections on YouTube.
Okay. That sounds interesting.
And what brought that about is I learned of what we just talked about a few years back, so I cut out neonics. And then a few years down the road, I started seeing lightning bug larvae when I was out checking my soybean planting in the spring. And then start noticing the amount of lightning bugs we have on your farm, and it's become pretty oppressive.
Huh. It's all interesting.
Yeah, it's
Where does it go from here?
I think it's kind of like what's going on with our human health and our gut biome is all pretty new. It's not new, but we're paying attention to it again. And it's very similar to that. Like the soil biology and our gut biology, that biome are nearly identical.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's a people are working just on a lot of different angles for this. Back years ago when cover crops were first thought of and mentioned, a lot of that was about reducing soil erosion. And it wasn't about soil health. There probably nobody really probably even thought of the term soil health, 40 years ago or whatever. But the government was encouraging farmers to grow cover crops to reduce erosion, and that really didn't encourage much of anybody. It didn't help much because it's like we talked earlier, it's a logistics issue, and you have to buy the seed, and the farmers are saying, so every year I have some erosion, and I just go, just through that gully, and I still grow crops there. So why would I spend a whole bunch of money just to stop a little bit of erosion? Because every year it just looks like a little bit, And over the years, what used to be a little gully, eventually, 50 years on now, that becomes a significant gully. And, it really is a problem, but it's something that you have to look at with a very long view instead of just, why should I pay for this year? So
Land is always changing.
so now we've learned that it's not just about soil erosion. It's about the health of the soil. All these different things living and dying in the soil, and all those things deliver more nutrients, organic nutrients to the plants, and the plants are able to take those up and use those, and then that ends up in the leaves or the seeds. And so the food that is produced in healthy soil is much more nutritious. So a lot of the people in the regenerative field now are saying that, our food has lost around 80% of the nutrition that was in it, 40 years ago. Wow. Because our soils are degraded that much. So, so you look at, the things that showing how much disease we have now with humans, whether it's cancer or diabetes or so on and so forth. People are consuming a lot of calories. Maybe they're trying to get that nutrition, but they're consuming too many calories to get the nutrition they need. And so then that leads to being overweight and that sort of thing. So where it's going is that it's not just for the land. It's not about the farmers. It's not about the crops. It's about human health and not going to the doctor and being on, 10 medications, by the time you're 60. It's about quality of life. It's about being able to enjoy, being healthy, people being healthy enough to enjoy their life and to, to carry on and enjoy their grandkids instead of being, in the hospital all the time.
And if the soil is getting that much worse over a period of 40 years, in 40 more years,
Exactly.
it's going to be compounded.
Exactly.
Are they experience the same problems we're having in other parts of the world?
It's everywhere. There's a few books. Soil, the Erosion of Civilizations is one. Can't think of the other one at the moment, but they go back and look at the fossilized records and everything and the deposits and see what's been going on. And the first agriculture communities started defining their soil resources.
I'm trying to get prepared for YouTube, which on this, so I did a look. Yeah.
But I looked up a Farm Like a Lunatic, Joe Salatin. Have you see any of
Yes.
land healing episode piece?
There's been a lot of them over the years. the Alan Savory Institute, he was pushing hard for this, I don't know, back in the 60s or 70s, I think, but somebody thinking a little different is pushed out of the universities.
Right.
And didn't receive too well. Yeah.
Doesn't fit with their mindset.
One of his quotes are what he determined by all this, and this was in Africa of the elephants and I'm not sure what all they tried to do there, but lack of a diversity is what the cause of desertification. If we have a monoculture out there, your water infiltration, your soil water holding capacity. Your soil is just simply malfunction.
You know, you say that word desertification. If we break that down, what that's saying is turning land to desert.
Yeah.
And it's, like I said, the books will tell you that most civilizations last 400 to 600 years before they depleted their resources. And that's, I think, why we founded this country, is because we had depleted our resources elsewhere.
One of the interesting things is in the United States, if you go out into those canyons in Utah where there are these cliff dwellers, they find corn cobs that are hundreds of years old back in, you know, the storage areas and around those places. They find, you know, corn cobs that have stayed. So they used to grow corn in those areas. And what is it now? It's scrub brush, it's scrub land. And there, you know, the Sahara used to be, you know, very lush and green with rivers running through it. You know, what changed? Well, there are a lot of people there and pretty close to where the, you know, the cradle of civilization was. Supposedly they were farming the heck out of it. And eventually the only place they could farm was along a river because they depleted all the nutrients in the soil. And, you know, and then when you don't have plants, you don't have anything, you know, moving moisture back into the air, and then the air gets real dry and then it doesn't rain. So there's a guy down in Mexico and that ranches in the Chihuahua, I don't know what they call it, province or wherever.
It's a state, basically.
And I can never remember his last name. His first name's Alejandro. He's, you know, very famous in the regenerative farming community. You know, he's taken basically scrubby, almost desert land, and, you know, where it takes 100 acres for a cow and a calf to survive, and he's turned that back into very, you know, far more productive pasture ground. And, you know, one of the things they've observed is now that they have plants, you know, grasses growing on his, you know, in his acres, and he's done with thousands of acres. They get more rain there now, and it will be raining on his farm, but not on the neighbor's farm, because the air above his farm has more moisture because the plants are respirating into the atmosphere.
Fabulous.
It's crazy.
You can see his farm on the radar, to the outline.
Wow.
And all he is doing to do this is his brain and a cowboy horse. When and where and how he moves these cattle around. He'll move them from the healthy part of the pasture, and they'll pick up the seeds and everything, and then they'll go over here to the rougher part of it, and the seeds will fall off.
That's no.
And going back to, you know, some of the other areas of the world, I think Australia actually is, you know, basically a leader in regenerative farming. And as you know, a lot of Australia is very dry, and you know, there's, you know, that there are these, like, I guess, rock star scientists, you know, that in the regenerative field that have, you know, basically figured things out that have, you know, helped shape what we're, you know, the direction, you know, the things we need to try and do on our farms. And there's an Australian scientist by the name of Christine Jones, who's, you know, become an expert on the, you know, the bacteria and things in the soil. And there's a, you know, there you know, people from the United States as well. There's Dr. White discovered this process called rhizophagy. Plants are actually pulling bacteria into their roots and then digesting bacteria to harvest the nutrients from bacteria. So we've always thought that plants were just getting nutrients directly from the soil. Well, a lot of their nutrients are actually pulled in.
They're essentially farming to bacteria.
And some of the bacteria survive the process, and the plant will spit them out, and the root hairs, and then the bacteria can then go to work in soil, breaking down more soil, and maybe be ingested into a plant again to you know, be partially digested. it's just crazy. So, nature has ways of doing things that, that we don't know. And as amazing as this is, there's probably more things that are far more amazing that we haven't even
Figured out.
Yeah.
That was discovered in 2010
Yeah. So some of this stuff is
with a microscope.
so very new that, people 30 years ago, they may have tried some of this stuff and saw that it worked, but they couldn't explain why. Nobody knew why compost worked. They just knew that it made plants more productive. Nobody knew that it was the bacteria and fungus in the compost that made that the plants were then ingesting. When you put that compost on, you're inoculating that soil with all the biology that's in the compost, and then it can go to work, and the plants can ingest that, and it's crazy stuff. I read a while back that people always wondered how you can build a pond and not put any fish on it in it, right? But eventually there will be fish in that pond. And so how does that happen? Well, ducks will go and eat fish eggs or frog eggs or whatever in one pond or a lake, and then they'll fly and poop in this pond you just built that has nothing in it, and some of those eggs will survive, and voila, now you have a stocked pond. And when you start realizing that nature has ways to accomplish things without us intervening, then sometimes you just have to learn to get out of the way and stop trying to stop nature from doing what it needs to do.
One interesting thing I heard, this is 15 years ago, I heard Ray Archuleta, they ranked because every new species you bring to the table, 7 or 8 new species follow. So back to if you're on the grow, it's your all right for a cover crop. You might be bringing 7 or 8 new species, but if I put a 2 or 3 or 5 way mix in there, the mass starts getting pretty big. Then you look at it the other way, it's on the applied insecticide that's killing everything. What am I taking away,
So what will be, how do we get this concept out to other farmers that this is what we need to be in for the health? For the health of the soil, for the health of the people.
It is difficult because for a farmer to adopt this, if they're not farming like this now, and most farmers, they're the grandson or granddaughter or great-granddaughter or great-grandson of, 3 or 4 or 5 generations of farming. And so for somebody to adopt this and just, it's kind of saying that we've been doing it wrong. You have to be open-minded. The reason that Tom is moving forward with stuff like this is because Tom knows that he's not perfect. He knows that he's not farming perfect right now, even with all the things he's done. So the first thing is farmers have to, be humble enough
Want to be admitted.
to say that, maybe there is a better way than what I'm doing, and, with the low price of corn and, that we're experiencing right now, there's and the consolidation of fertilizer and grade elevators and that sort of thing. So you've got more and more big corporations that our money is going to whenever we put out a crop. You got to buy seed, you're buying it from Bayer or Monsanto or wherever. You're buying chemicals and from the same people, and you're buying fertilizer from Nutrient or whoever, and they're reselling all this stuff to you. So all of our money that we put out a crop with is going to giant corporations. If you're farming, the old, with the way most farmers farm today, whenever you start transitioning this, if you're using compost as one of your major fertilization components, you can make it on your farm. There's a something called fish hydrolysate, which is a high in phosphate and has a lot of other great stuff in it for plants. You can make that all you need is a bunch of dead fish. And there's a guy actually down up the river a little bit, up the Ohio River, Matt Lorenza. He's experimenting with getting Asian carp out of the Ohio River and making fish hydrolyzate with it, so we can, kill two birds with one stone. There is like get rid of some of these invasive species out of our rivers and make some really great fertilizer for our farms. And so one of the big things of this is you can get away from spending so much of your possible profit on fertilizer and chemicals, and keep that money in the community. So once farmers start to realize that this is not necessarily, you don't have to look at it as, a better way to farm or not, as a more profitable way to farm. Once it's a more profitable way to farm, and people start to realize that, at some point they have to say, I don't care if my variable is rolling over in my grave. I need to make some money, to pay for my kids to go to college or whatever. I need to make some more money, and my neighbor's doing it this way, and they're making more money, so I need to, so it's kind of got to come down to, whereas somebody who's farming regeneratively, if they can pay more cash rent to rent some ground, then they're going to take that ground away from somebody who's farming it with a lot of chemicals and fertilizers. So once the big farmers who rent thousands and thousands of acres start to lose some of their ground to smaller farmers that are doing regenerative farming, that's probably when the tide will turn, and those big farmers will start to realize they got to change the way they do things. There's a lot of interest in regenerative farming and higher value crops like in orchards and vineyards. They make, sometimes the rent on ground where you grow stuff like that is $10,000 an acre a year. So they can afford to hire a consultant for thousands of dollars to come in and help them make this transition, or to do whatever they have to do to change things, or to buy the equipment to support the things they need to do now. So there are some industries or some parts of farming that are a little more ahead because just due to the economics of it. But it's getting the word out, doing things like this podcast, so somebody will hear it.
Be aware of.
Maybe a landowner who doesn't farm is going to hear this, and they're going to say, you know what, I'm going to look into this. And if they look into it and then they say, you know what, I want my land to be farmed regeneratively. I drive by there and I see, this gully that's developing out in my field, or I go out there and I dig and there's no earthworms in there. Maybe somebody's going to hear it and they're going to say, you know what, I need to find a farmer that will do it the regeneratively. And then I may even take a little bit less rent if I could get somebody to do it. We have a cousin that has been trying to get people that farm his land to plant cover crops, and they just wouldn't do it, or they do it so ineffectively that nothing grew. So finally he, decided to let us rent his ground. So we're hoping that that's the big trend. There are, and not for my sake, but like I said, the bigger picture here is the health of the human race and our kids. The health of our children and opportunities. And so, there's a movie called Kiss the Ground on Netflix. If you have a Netflix subscription, it's not necessarily for farmers. It's not going to tell you how to farm regeneratively, but it's going to discuss some of these things and show you some of the people who are doing it. There's a new one out that's called Common Ground. I may have those opposite. It was a Common Ground first, then Kiss the Ground, or Kiss the Ground. Yeah. It's But there's a newer one now called Common Ground. It's not on Netflix yet, but I think if you search for it, you can pay to watch it, $6 or $7. RFK Jr. is aware of regenerative agriculture. He loves the idea. If he was our agricultural secretary, probably some things would happen. There are some people in high positions with the Trump administration that are interested, are regenerative farmers. That particularly a guy named Jimmy Emmons is a cattle rancher, and he's a regenerative cattle rancher, and he has a position in the USDA now. As part of it is getting our leaders and in USDA and understanding it so that changes can happen to the farm bill that will encourage farmers to take care of their soil. And there are different angles. It's public education, it's farmer education, and it's, the government institutions, adopting the change.
There's a lot to change, I think. And so there's Fresh RX in Oklahoma who is, it's Medicare or Medicaid, I don't know, but you're getting fresh veggies more or less prescribed to you. And then they're getting some instruction on how to prepare and how to eat healthy, essentially. And people's A1 diabetes numbers are dropping. Some people have gotten off of insulin, some of them have lost hundreds of pounds.
Wow.
But getting that to catch on across the country, or how is that going to influence farmers that are not growing human food? And even if we could grow other crops such as wheat for flour or rye or oats or sunflowers, whatever it may be, the infrastructure and the markets are not set up for these different crops. So there's a lot of infrastructure needs to change, I guess.
But Rudolph and Hinkle farms are doing what you can to push it in the right direction. And we appreciate all your efforts. We appreciate what you're doing. Did he tell you how we met a few years ago?
I've not heard this story.
We were in a play together. My daughter was in a play and somebody left, and I came in as a swindler to swindle Jed Clampett's money.
Sounds like perfect roles for you guys.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Fellas, we so appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Randy. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us for this program of WFPC Podcasting. The program is brought to you by Harris Real Estate, Hathaway Excavating and Rock Yard, and Petersburg Car Wash. Please like the podcast and share with your friends so more people can hear about WFPC. You may find WFPC Podcasting on our website, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to your favorite media. Join us next Friday for another WFPC podcast exploring the people, information, and the news right here in Pike County. See you next week.
Thanks for watching WFPC Podcasting, your local source for the heart and history of Pike County, Indiana. From back roads to town centers, we bring you the voices, stories, and news that shape our community. Join us on this journey through the past, present, and future of Pike County, Indiana. Tune in next week for the next episode of WFPC Podcasting.